What happens when a foreign military jet crosses into your country without permission, without warning? This isn't fiction. It just happened, and the response was nothing short of explosive. In the high-stakes world of geopolitics, border sovereignty is sacred. When it's violated, especially by a global superpower like the United States, the fallout can echo far beyond radar screens and air traffic control towers. The incident you're about to uncover, a U.S. military aircraft crossing into Mexican airspace, triggered a fierce and immediate backlash, and at the center of it all, President Claudia Sheinbaum, unleashing a retaliatory move that stunned both Washington and the world. The title isn't sensationalism. It's a summary of a shocking reality. U.S. military jets carrying deported migrants attempted to land on Mexican soil without bilateral agreement, without diplomatic coordination, without consent. It was bold, it was calculated, and it was stopped in its tracks. Mexico didn't just protest. It pushed back with forceful words, strict airspace control, and an unmistakable message. This is our territory. You do not cross it on your terms. In recent years, the immigration crisis has fueled endless debate, protests, policy shifts, and political upheaval. But this latest move, a unilateral U.S. military operation involving migrant repatriation, crossed more than just a geographical border. It crossed a political line. A line that Claudia Sheinbaum was not about to let disappear quietly. This is more than a diplomatic incident. It's a clash of ideologies, a confrontation between two nations with rising tension and a long, complicated history. On one side, Donald Trump, back in office and reigniting his aggressive anti-immigration agenda. On the other, Sheinbaum, Mexico's first female president, a leader facing the ultimate test of power, control, and principle. What makes this moment so pivotal is what happened next. The U.S. jets turned back, forced to retreat, an unspoken admission that this time they went too far. It wasn't just an aborted mission, it was a symbolic defeat, an aerial retreat that marked a shift in the tone of U.S.-Mexico relations. In the streets of Mexico City, in headlines across Latin America, one phrase kept surfacing: she stood her ground. Claudia Sheinbaum, seen by many as a calm, technical leader, revealed something else: a fierce, unwavering defense of Mexican sovereignty. Her stance wasn't just political, it was personal, it was national, it was historical. This standoff didn't involve missiles or troops, but its impact could be just as lasting. It challenges the notion that powerful nations can act with impunity. It raises a burning question in international relations. What happens when you push a country too far? Because this wasn't just a military flight, it was a power play. And for the first time in years, someone pushed back and made the giants turn around. The flight that shouldn't have happened. It was supposed to be routine, or at least that's how U.S. officials tried to present it. A military aircraft, the unmistakable shadow of American power in the skies, crossing into Mexican airspace with a human cargo of deported migrants. No fanfare, no warning, just another silent move in the ever-escalating immigration chess game between the United States and Mexico. But this time, something was different. Something snapped. And that flight, intended as a quiet act of enforcement, became the spark that ignited a diplomatic firestorm. Inside Mexico's air traffic control system, the alert came swiftly. A U.S. Air Force C-17 had entered Mexican airspace and was descending toward a military base in Tamaulipas. Mexican authorities were caught off guard, not because they didn't see it coming, but because they were never told it was coming. The aircraft was carrying deported Mexican nationals, part of a recent hardline maneuver by the newly reinstated Trump administration to fast-track removals under a renewed border crackdown. But there had been no formal coordination, no agreement, no legal basis, just raw power, banking on silence and submission. President Claudia Sheinbaum was briefed immediately. In an emergency session with her top security advisors, she listened in silence as the details unfolded. When she finally spoke, her words were sharp and resolute. "We will not accept this. Not like this." It was a moment that redefined her leadership in the eyes of many. Known for her calm, scientific approach, Sheinbaum now faced the ultimate geopolitical test: respond to a foreign incursion or risk being seen as weak in a moment that demanded strength. What happened next was as swift as it was symbolic. Mexican air defense systems locked onto the incoming plane. Orders were relayed to redirect the aircraft, and just as quickly as it had arrived, the US jet was forced to change course and turn back. It didn't land. It didn't offload its passengers. It fled. And that retreat, that mid-air reversal, said more than any press release or statement ever could. For the first time in recent memory, a Mexican president had publicly and powerfully said no to the United States and made it stick. Behind closed doors, US officials scrambled. The Pentagon called it a miscommunication. The State Department labeled it an unfortunate logistical error, but no one in Mexico was buying it. This wasn't a mistake, it was a test. And Sheinbaum had passed it with fire in her voice and steel in her actions. The flight that shouldn't have happened became more than just a foreign policy incident. It became a symbol, a line in the sand, a warning to any nation, ally or not, that Mexican sovereignty is not to be toyed with. In a region long used to bowing under American pressure, Sheinbaum's response felt like a rupture from the past, a declaration of a new era where respect isn't asked for, it's demanded. As news broke across media platforms, a wave of national pride swept through the country. Commentators used words like dignity, defiance, and independence. Social media lit up with hashtags praising the president. Even voices usually critical of her administration acknowledged the gravity of her stand. It was a moment of rare unity, forged not in ideology, but in identity. And now, the world is watching what comes next, watching how far this will go, watching if this was a one-time standoff or the beginning of a broader shift in how Mexico asserts itself on the world stage. What do you think this moment means for Mexico's future? Do you believe this was a turning point or just a temporary flare? Let us know in the comments. If you had to describe Claudia's response in one word, what would it be? Try using words like bold, historic, or uncompromising. Claudia's silent strategy turned loud. From the outside, Claudia Sheinbaum had always projected a sense of composure, a technocrat, a scientist, a quiet force in the background of political storms. But when a US military plane invaded Mexican airspace without warning, that silence cracked. What emerged wasn't just defiance, it was calculated power. And it caught everyone, especially the United States, completely off guard. Sheinbaum didn't come to power with the charisma of a populist or the theatrics of her predecessor. Her strength was data, order, and logic. But the presidency changes people, and moments like this one don't allow quiet leadership to stay quiet for long. Behind her calm exterior, a storm had been brewing for months. Tensions with the newly re-elected Trump administration had been escalating ever since he began reinstating some of his most controversial immigration policies. Sheinbaum knew it was only a matter of time before Washington would test her boundaries, and she prepared. While public discourse remained focused on domestic reforms, inside the presidential palace, Sheinbaum was quietly reshaping Mexico's approach to foreign interference. Meetings with her defense secretary intensified. Diplomatic channels were reinforced. Contingency plans for cross-border incidents were drafted and stored. She anticipated something would come, and when it did, she responded like someone who had already made the decision weeks ago. The refusal to allow the US jet to land wasn't impulsive. It was part of a broader doctrine she had been crafting, a reassertion of Mexican sovereignty on the international stage. Her team didn't shout. They didn't hold press conferences filled with fury. Instead, they worked the back channels, delivered the message through precise action, and let the world interpret it however it wanted. The jet turned around. Mexico hadn't fired a single shot, but it had made its message thunder across hemispheres. The timing was no accident either. With Trump ramping up deportation operations and seeking visible wins on immigration, Sheinbaum knew this moment would be more than just a breach of protocol. It would be used to set precedent. If Mexico accepted this incursion, it would open the door to more flights, more pressure, more disregard for borders and process. She knew that saying yes once meant never being able to say no again, so she drew the line. And she drew it without noise, without bluster, just power, exercised precisely when it mattered most. In doing so, she changed how the world saw her and how Mexicans saw themselves. What do you think of a leader who doesn't shout, but acts when it counts? Was Claudia's quiet build-up more effective than a loud political campaign would have been? Drop a comment with one word to describe her leadership, maybe strategic, resolute, or disciplined. Trump's gamble meets Mexico's wall of resistance. For Donald Trump, immigration has always been political gold. From the moment he stepped into the political arena, he built his brand on promises of walls, deportations, and closed borders. So when he returned to office, it was no surprise that his administration resumed its crackdown with renewed force. But what he might not have expected was the strength of the wall he'd face, not a physical one, but a diplomatic and sovereign wall erected by a determined President Sheinbaum. The Trump administration believed it still held the upper hand. The assumption was simple. Mexico, reliant on trade and politically sensitive to U.S. decisions, would fall in line. The previous years had created a precedent of pressure. Tariff threats, border shutdowns, sudden policy changes. Mexico had often responded with reluctant compliance, but this time something changed. Mexico was no longer playing defense, it was taking initiative. Trump's move to send military aircraft to deliver deported migrants was not just provocative, it was strategic. By bypassing civil aviation and involving the military, he raised the stakes. It was meant to demonstrate dominance, to challenge Mexico's reaction, and to set the tone for the next 4 years. But instead of deference, he got rejection. Instead of silence, he got steel. And instead of a passive partner, he found an active resistor. Claudia Sheinbaum didn't just block the flight, she turned it into a moment of political resistance. Her government sent a clear signal: we may be neighbors, but we're not your backyard. And that message struck a chord across Latin America. Suddenly, leaders in Colombia, Guatemala, and even Argentina began expressing similar discontent with U.S. deportation tactics. What started as a single act of defiance sparked a regional echo. The gamble had failed. Trump expected compliance and got confrontation. The military flight was supposed to show strength. But the real show of strength came from the ground, from Mexico's refusal, from Sheinbaum's command, from a nation that chose sovereignty over submission. This wasn't just a moment of resistance, it was a geopolitical pivot. It marked a shift in the balance of influence across the Western Hemisphere, and it left Washington scrambling to recalibrate its approach. Do you think Trump underestimated Mexico's position? Or was this a calculated risk that backfired? Tell us your thoughts. Use words like miscalculation, arrogance, or pushback in your comments. Let's talk about how power moves can boomerang. The jet that turned back, a silent symbol of surrender. It was a maneuver as cold as it was clear. A U.S. military aircraft, mid-flight, forced to retreat from foreign airspace, not because of a threat, but because of a refusal. No weapons were fired, no fighters scrambled, but the message couldn't have been louder. Mexico is no longer the passive player in this game. The moment the jet banked and began its retreat, the symbolism was undeniable. The most powerful military force in the world had been told to back off, and it did. For decades, Mexican airspace has seen the shadows of U.S. aircraft pass over without consequence. Intelligence surveillance, joint operations, even humanitarian supply drops, all were tolerated, and many were coordinated. But this flight was different. It wasn't part of a cooperative mission. It was unilateral. It was a presumption. It was a test of how far the United States could go before Mexico pushed back. And this time, that test ended mid-air. Inside the C-17, the mission was clear. Deport dozens of migrants, Mexican nationals, directly to their country of origin via military protocol. No paperwork exchanged with Mexican authorities, no clearance granted. It was meant to be quiet, efficient, and unnoticed. But it didn't stay unnoticed for long. From the moment radar stations picked up the plane's unauthorized approach, the wheels of resistance were set in motion. Phone lines lit up between the Mexican Air Force and presidential advisors, and within minutes, the directive came. Block the landing, deny the airspace, send the message. The command was precise, the result was immediate, and the image, although no camera caught it, will linger in geopolitical memory. A U.S. military jet turning back in defeat, ordered not by American command, but by a foreign capital refusing to yield. The power in that silence, in that turning motion, is impossible to overstate. It wasn't just the turning of an aircraft, it was the turning of perception. For decades, the assumption was that Washington calls the shots, and Latin American nations respond. But in this singular act, that script was flipped. And Mexico, through Sheinbaum's administration, showed that respect isn't just a matter of diplomacy. It's enforced with policy, presence, and preparedness. Across the political spectrum, analysts saw the retreat as more than just logistics. It was a symbolic surrender, a realization that the U.S. cannot impose its will through sheer movement anymore. For the Biden administration, or any that follows, the lesson is now clear. Flights may be easy to plan, but landing without respect isn't an option anymore. And while no apologies were issued, the silence from Washington following the incident was almost as telling as the retreat itself. There was no bragging, no blame shifting, just a pause, a moment of quiet recalibration. Because when a nation like Mexico responds with unexpected strength, even a superpower must reconsider its moves. What does that turning jet mean to you? Was it just one plane, or was it a shift in power? If you could choose one word to describe that moment, would it be humbling, historic, or necessary? Leave your answer below. Latin America watches and echoes the message. Mexico's defiance didn't happen in a vacuum. The moment news broke that a U.S. military aircraft had been denied entry and forced to turn back, something shifted, not just in Mexico, but across the region. In capitals from Bogotá to Buenos Aires, leaders took notice, and in many ways they saw themselves in that moment. Because for years, Latin America has lived under the shadow of U.S. influence, economically, politically, and militarily. But now, with one bold act, Mexico had done what so many others had only whispered about. It said no. Almost immediately the ripples began. In Colombia, President Gustavo Petro referenced the incident in a closed-door cabinet meeting, urging his ministers to reassess their own deportation agreements with the United States. In Guatemala, journalists began pressing their government on how often flights like these occurred without public knowledge. Even in Brazil, where leadership had taken a more moderate tone, the question surfaced in political debates. How much control do we really have over our skies? Mexico had thrown down a marker, and its regional neighbors were picking it up. The truth is, many Latin American nations have long tolerated a form of quiet compliance with the United States, especially on migration. Deals were struck, funds exchanged, promises made. But those deals often came at the cost of autonomy, and in moments of crisis, the pressure from Washington left little room for resistance. Mexico's action disrupted that cycle, and for leaders who have felt trapped in the system, it sparked something close to hope. Not everyone reacted with praise, of course. Some governments remained silent, wary of provoking the U.S. Others issued cautious statements emphasizing dialogue and cooperation. But on social media, the response was more honest. Activists, academics, and everyday citizens across Latin America hailed Sheinbaum's decision as a moment of Latin dignity. Memes circulated showing the jet turning away. Quotes from Mexican officials were translated into Portuguese, Quechua, and Guarani. Hashtags trended with messages like "even the media picked up the tone." Op-eds in major regional newspapers called it a turning point for hemispheric sovereignty. Commentators compared Sheinbaum's move to iconic moments in Latin resistance, reframing her not just as a national leader, but as a regional symbol. And in the corridors of US power, this didn't go unnoticed. Analysts and advisors began to warn that what happened with Mexico could set a precedent. If one country asserts its right to control its airspace and refuses forced cooperation, what stops others from doing the same? That's the question echoing now across Latin America. If Mexico can do it, why can't we? What do you think? Will this ignite a broader movement across the continent, or is it an isolated stand? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Try using words like unity, so a nation rallies behind its president. When the news broke that Mexico had rejected a US military plane and forced it to retreat, it wasn't just a diplomatic win. It was a moment of national awakening. The images may have been invisible, but the story was loud, powerful, and deeply emotional. From the heart of Mexico City to the smallest towns across the country, people reacted with a surge of pride that hadn't been felt in years. And at the center of it all stood Claudia Sheinbaum, no longer just a political figure, but now a symbol of defiance, strength, and dignity. For decades, Mexicans have watched their country navigate the complicated waters of US relations. While diplomacy has kept the peace, many citizens have long felt the weight of inequality in that relationship. Whether it's trade, immigration, or security, there's been a lingering sense that the United States moves first and Mexico adjusts. But this time, Mexico moved first, and the nation watched it unfold not with fear, but with admiration. Sheinbaum's approval ratings, which had been steady but unspectacular, suddenly began to climb. Analysts noted an unexpected shift, support from both the left and the right. Her response to the incident transcended party politics. It wasn't about ideology, it was about sovereignty. It was about showing that Mexico wouldn't be steamrolled, manipulated, or treated as a landing strip for foreign agendas. Social media became a battlefield of pride. Hashtags like "Con Claudia" and "Mexico si respeta" dominated timelines. Artists created illustrations of Sheinbaum standing firm while jets turned back. Political cartoons, usually critical of her, portrayed her as a protector of national dignity. Even celebrities weighed in, praising her composure and strength. And while her critics remained vocal, many of them paused, just for a moment, to acknowledge that this time, she'd gotten it right. She had stood firm in a moment that demanded more than politics. It demanded principle. And that didn't go unnoticed. But it wasn't just about Sheinbaum. It was about what she represented. A new generation of Mexican leadership unwilling to accept quiet submission. The public response wasn't just personal. It was patriotic. In cafes, schools, and offices, people began discussing sovereignty again. Young people, often detached from politics, shared clips and quotes from her speeches, inspired not by nationalism, but by the idea that Mexico doesn't have to bend every time power knocks on its door. The entire moment has become a case study in modern leadership, in how quiet authority, when paired with decisive action, can shake even the most powerful players. And now, with the support of a newly energized public, Sheinbaum carries more than political capital. She carries momentum. Do you think this moment redefined Sheinbaum's presidency? Was it just policy or something deeper? Drop your take below. If you had to describe how you felt when you heard the jet turn back, what word comes to mind? Try pride, respect, or finally? And let's see how many people felt the same way. Variety or wake-up call, if you feel this moment, means more than just a flight. What comes next in a region on edge? The plane may have turned back, but the consequences are still flying forward. This was never just about a single aircraft. It was about precedent. And now that the world has seen Mexico say no, the question everyone is asking is, what happens next? Diplomatic relations between Mexico and the United States are now walking a tightrope. Behind closed doors, the White House has entered damage control mode. Publicly, they're playing it cool, but sources inside D.C. reveal growing concern over how this event could ripple outward. The U.S. doesn't just deal with Mexico, it depends on it. Trade, security, migration, intelligence cooperation, all of it is suddenly more fragile. For Mexico, this isn't the end of a crisis. It's the beginning of a new approach. Sheinbaum's government is already exploring ways to tighten airspace regulations, revise repatriation agreements, and push back against any future silent incursions. She's not looking for conflict, but she's made it clear that she won't avoid it if provoked. Meanwhile, Latin America is watching closely. Other governments are taking cues, holding meetings and analyzing the fallout. If Mexico can block a U.S. military jet and walk away stronger, what does that mean for smaller nations with similar concerns? Could this mark the start of a broader regional alignment, one less dependent on Washington and more focused on intra-Latin unity? The geopolitical chessboard is shifting. China, Russia, and other global players are already eyeing the moment as a signal that the US may be losing influence in its own hemisphere. If allies are now setting limits, what does that mean for America's strategic posture going forward? What happens when the backyard starts building its own fences? Internally, Mexico will also face new challenges. National pride is powerful, but it needs to be sustained with results. Sheinbaum's administration will have to navigate rising expectations, pressure from opposition parties, and potential economic consequences if the US decides to retaliate quietly through trade or policy restrictions. The real test may not have been the jet, but what happens now that it's gone? The region, the world, and the people are all watching, and the next move could define not just Sheinbaum's legacy, but Mexico's new identity on the global stage. How do you see the future playing out after this confrontation? Is this a momentary flare-up or the start of a new era in Latin American politics? Let us know below. Use words like realignment, awakening, or power shift if you believe this moment means more than just headlines. If you've made it this far, we want to hear from you. How did this video speak to your heart? Leave a comment below saying, "I liked the content," and share how this message impacted you personally. Your voice matters, and your experience can inspire others who are also searching for truth, strength, and clarity in these challenging times. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on powerful, thought-provoking content like this. Your subscription helps us continue creating videos that inform, inspire, and awaken. Leave a like to show your support for this mission. It may seem small, but it makes a big difference. And of course, don't miss the next video that's already waiting for you at the end of this one. May God bless your life abundantly, with wisdom, courage, and peace. Stay strong, stay aware, and stay connected.